Well, good morning. Today is Monday, December 23rd, and hope you had a good weekend. Today we are in Proverbs chapter 22, and we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 16 today. The Word of God says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold." Verse 2, "The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is maker of them all." Verse 3, "A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." Verse 4, "By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life." Verse 5, "Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from them." Verse 6, very familiar verse. "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Verse 7, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Verse 8, "He who sows iniquity will reap sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor." Verse 10, "Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease." Verse 22, verse 11, "He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend." Verse 12, "The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless." Verse 13, "The lazy man says, 'There's a lion outside. I will be slain in the streets. So I'll just stay in the house.'" Verse 14, "The mouth of an immoral woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there." 15, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him." Verse 16, "He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty." You have to love Proverbs. It's important that we understand the purpose of Proverbs, what they are. They're wisdom literature. And there are lots of examples of wisdom literature throughout many different writings. These are, of course, inspired of God. But nonetheless, we need to understand them for what they are. They're phrases that are truth statements, but they're not promises. And there's a difference. For instance, and I'll give you a great example. Verse 6, the one I pointed out a moment ago. "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Many parents have done their level best to train up a child, to raise their children in the church, to teach them by example, to correct them when they're wrong. And this passage that we just read, verse 6, it's also mentioned right there in verse 15, "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him." Well, some people seems like some children seems like the more you punish them, the harder their resolve is. It doesn't mean you don't correct, but there's a right way to correct. Discipline is different than punishment. Punishment is not always discipline. Let me try to explain. When we use the term discipline, the root of that word, it's the same as the word disciple. And a disciple is one who is taught. A disciple is a student. The disciples of Jesus. The Apostle Paul said that he was a disciple of Gamaliel, and he went to that school, that rabbinic school. He sat under the teaching of this man, and the disciples of Jesus sat under his teaching. And so the idea, when we discipline children, it's not out of anger. It's to correct. It's to teach. It's to teach that this behavior is unacceptable. This thinking is wrong. And here's the right way. And so we should, number one, we should never discipline in anger. And, I can't tell you how many times I apologized to my children over the years when they were growing up, when I'd get mad. And I would correct them, but I didn't do it the right way. And I'd always go back and make things right, try to make things right with them. And let them know that, what they did was wrong, but the way I handled it was not the proper way either. And that's not easy to do. I can't think of how many times going through the store and my kids would say, "Oh, can I have one? Can I have one of those?" Right? And the pat answer was no. And then I did that a few times, and then one day I just thought about it for a second. Well, why am I saying no? What's the reason that I can't bless my children with that, something that they really want? And so, train up a child. The idea here is like you're training a vine. I have a trellis out in my prayer garden, and I have tried on a couple of different occasions to train the English ivy to grow up into that vine. And I mean, I've tied the vine to the trellis, and it's a work in progress. As it grows, it's slowly starting to grow and cover the trellis, which that's what I want it to do. I want it to grow up onto that trellis. Well, the idea here of train up a child in the way he should go. It's that same idea of patiently, and what's crazy is sometimes those things grow so fast. It's like you look and next thing you know, there's a 2-foot thing just hanging off here to the side, and I've got to lasso it back up and connect it to the trellis. So it's a thing that takes patience. But here's the thing about this verse. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Is not a guarantee. The one thing about a child that you all know, if you have children, is they have a mind and they have a will. And you can do everything you can to point them in the right direction, but they still have to make a choice. And sometimes a child chooses to go a different way. And it's not the parent's fault when a child chooses to rebel. It's not the parent's fault when a young adult or an adult leaves the church, makes poor choices, gets addicted to drugs or alcohol, and sees their life destroyed. That's not on the parents. It's not a failure of the parents. It's a failure of the child to heed the discipline that they were given. And so that same principle, the fact that these are not promises, they're just merely observation. Now, the likelihood is if you train up a child right, if he's got sense, he'll heed that training and he'll turn out fine. But it's not a promise. Now, some of these you can take to the bank. Verse 2, the rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Now, that's not a, if you do this, this will happen kind of statement. That's just God is God of both the rich and the poor. And so you just have to be discerning about how we understand and how we apply the Proverbs. He who sows iniquity will reap sorrow. Generally, that's the way it works. And maybe not even in this lifetime. You know, another one of the Psalms, Psalm of Asaph, he says, you know, why, God? He asked the question, Lord, why is it that, you know, I do all the right things. I try to live righteously and fear you and love you, and I suffer. And yet here are these wicked people, and it seems like they never even get sick. Well, he concludes later, he said, then I went into the house of the Lord. I went into the temple. And I saw their end. And what he realized is that maybe they've got it good right now, but the end result at the end of their life is they're going to perish. They're going to suffer. And that's kind of where the saying comes from that says, for those who are believers in Jesus, this world is the closest thing to hell we'll ever experience. But on the other hand, for those who don't know the Lord, those who are unregenerate, those who are lost, this world is the closest thing to heaven they'll ever experience. And that's a tragedy. So, as you read through these Proverbs, you know, there's several things that stand out just very quickly. Solomon contrasts the rich and the poor in verses 2, verse 7, verse 9, verse 16. He talks about the lazy man, making excuses. Oh, there's a lion outside. I guess I'll just stay in the house. I'm not going to go out and work. He talks about giving to the poor, treating the poor justly. And apparently that's a big deal with the Lord. So maybe that's an appropriate thing here a couple days before Christmas, is that we remember the less fortunate and be a blessing to those around us. That's all I have for today. Hope you have a blessed day. We will see you again tomorrow.